Hello, my name is Matt Brittain, and I'm the laboratory director for One Bond Laboratories, which is a subsidiary of SEA Limited. And we're a fairly new established cannabis lab in the state of Ohio. We're also doing analysis on hemp and CBD products. So today I'd just like to talk to you a little bit about some of the challenges that we kind of went through in getting our laboratory up and off the ground. We have quite a bit of experience in analytical chemistry, but in setting up this lab, there are some unique challenges to just in general transitioning to more of a fully functional and full one-stop kind of shop laboratory. So today I will talk a little bit about method development, some of the important parts of sample traceability, and just data management in general. So the objective of this talk is kind of twofold. One, what we just I gave you the overview on the analytical laboratory setup part, and then some of the buzzwords and some of the pitfalls in this whole laboratory setup process. So the four main objectives within the laboratory setup is looking at your instrumentation and the method development, and then also sample flow as samples come in, how you track them, and then that big word traceability. And then once you have your samples and you run your analysis, there's the data portion, data management, and then also reporting out to your clients. And then the very important part of all analytical labs is your quality assurance and proficiencies. So instrumentation, we'll start off there. The main questions that you want to ask whenever you're looking at setting up an analytical lab is, what is the purpose of your lab? Are you a regulatory lab? So you're following very specific requirements that are handed down through a government body or something for your particular client. So you know what your standard tests are. You know what particular requirements are there. If you're looking at cannabinoids, what cannabinoids? If you're looking at heavy metals, what are those heavy metals? You have specific lists that are required. And there's also the second portion of a laboratory, and that's kind of like your services. Are you doing anything above and beyond those regulatory requirements, or do you have specific testing that is not a requirement, and that would be something that you're trying to meet the needs of a customer? That would be like terpenes or other types of analysis that would give your client more information, sometimes from their point, a marketing standpoint, and then other times would be just something that they need to know about their product to meet their profiles. So in looking at those lists of things and answering these questions that you're looking for, what instruments do you need to fulfill this purpose? Is it LC, liquid chromatography, gas chromatography? Do you need, what is your limits of detection? So how powerful do these instruments need to be? Because you can spend a lot of money and a lot of time trying to get information, trying to do things that are not necessary to meet your purpose of your lab. And other times you don't want to be finding instruments or getting instrumentation that is inferior and won't get you the information that you want. So where that upfront costs and kind of have those kinds of things in the back of your mind. And then also as you're pulling in laboratory equipment and instrumentation, try to think about other technologies and how you're going to integrate everything to speak to your systems as a whole. And then the final component, if you're setting up a lab from scratch that's new, you want to think about what kind of goals, long-term goals you have for your laboratory. So the instrumentation, what is their capability not only on the tests and the analytical methods that they can do, but how quickly samples can be pushed through. And you may spend a little bit more upfront to have some rapid capabilities or some expandability versus buying something that would be inferior to your long-term goals. So you have to kind of weigh those as a different components to say. If it's you spend a little bit more up front so that you have a little bit better capabilities, but you don't want to spend something so much up front, you're buying something that you'll never actually get to use. So once you kind of have the idea of where your goal is as far as what your laboratory is going to be looking at, then you get into the method development portion. And this is really where your operators or your chemists come into play. It's really important to seek out strong talent and talent that has integrity, so they know what they're looking for and they know how to use the particular types of equipment that you're using, or to be able to know where the training ability of these individuals are. So can they pick up new instrumentation? Do they have a broad scope of methods, particularly if they're a liquid chromatography individual? Do they also have some background in GC, or would they have some ability to do microbiology? So look for the individuals, depending on how large your lab is and what kind of equipment that you need, what their capabilities are. And as I was saying, the integrity of the individual, because analytical techniques, there's a lot of ins and outs and a lot of ability to change or manipulate things. And it's really important to be able to trust and be able to know that the information that they are producing is solid. So when you're going through this method development process, you really need to sit back initially and look at your feasibility. Do you have what you need? Then this is where probably the most important part is going out and doing your book research. I was once told that you can spend hours and hours and hours in the lab trying to figure something out, and it can take you 10 minutes of doing book research to get that same answer. So it's important to be able to go out, look in literature, talk to your suppliers. There's a ton of information out there on how to set up your methods, what columns to use, what some extraction techniques are out there. So you do your book research, and then you have your plan set in motion. And that's whenever you can really start your development and get it actually set up on your equipment itself. And then once you have the base method in, that's when you go into the optimization stage. And that's where you're tweaking to really tailor your brand, really tailor your instrument in your lab to this method and to the clients that you want to serve. So after you have a solid method and you really kind of get the method set up exactly how you want to, you go into this characterization and validation process. And I'm going to talk about validation a little bit more on the next slide, but this is where you're really trying to characterize out your method to show what you are doing is exactly what you say you're doing. And then once you have everything up and running, it's just implementation. And this is where you're getting samples in and you're able to actually produce data. So method validation. Validation is really, in a nutshell, just setting up a system and documenting that you are able to test specifically what you're saying you're testing for, and that you have a high degree of certainty that you're able to provide your clients with what you're saying you are actually providing them, and that your results are trustworthy, and that anybody can look at your method and say you have shown everything you need to know to prove that your method is up and running the way it's supposed to be. So a few of the things that you look at is your limited detection and your limited quantification, your precision and accuracy, how robust is your method, what is your range, how low you go to how high you can see as far as the amounts within your samples. So there's a lot of different components within method validation that you'll have to really kind of keep in mind as you're setting up a validation plan. And there's a lot of different resources out there to be able to really kind of get all the different components together. It's really important to take time and really kind of walk through this validation plan slowly and keep notes and document everything that you are doing and all of the data, so you have it in one spot to be able to put together a package to really show your method is up and running at a high quality. So once you kind of have your methods and your instrumentation and everything up and running and everything is validated, you're ready to actually start the client-facing portion of the analytical testing. And this is really where it comes down to your sample management. How do you get samples? What is the workflow within your lab? The all-important traceability, and then your reagents and your consumables, and how those kind of interplay within all of the levels of your sample management. So to do this, a lot of times you need technologies or softwares to kind of help integrate within your laboratory a process to make this smooth and pretty seamless. A lot of times you use what's called a LIMS system, or Laboratory Information Management Program or system. And so this is really kind of the heartbeat of an analytical lab. And this is where a lot of times it is required by your government bodies if you are a regulatory lab. And LIMS can be used for a lot of different things within a lab. And different LIMS programs have a lot of different sections or different components that can be used. And some of them are really, really strong, and some of them are not as good. So a good LIMS system, you really are able to track your sample from your intake all the way through to the end. And that's basically what traceability is. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. And especially in the cannabis industry, traceability is a very important component because of all the regulatory issues that could come in. But a LIMS system, it will help as you bring a sample in, you log it into this system, and then a lot of them have a function of workflow so that it can notify certain individuals that a sample is ready for them. And depending on how the size of your lab, if you have different individuals that do a lot of different things, as far as you may have a group of individuals that like lab technicians that do extractions and do sample preparations as far as vials are concerned. And then you may have another group of chemists that actually do work with the instrumentation and collect your data and reporting. And then once they do data analysis, then it may trigger somebody else for an approval process so that you can actually have somebody do a peer review and then a final review before your data actually flows out to your clients. And then a lot of other components of a LIMS system, some of them have billing and can actually make invoices. Some will be able to produce your reports for you. And they really are able to integrate in many different locations within the lab. It's important when you're looking at a LIMS system that they integrate with your instrumentation so that there is no transposition, or you're not transposing data to put them within or dropping it into the LIMS system. That data is pulled directly from the instruments so that there's no errors and you're not having to go back through and just do a peer check of data entry. You're trying to reduce the amount of locations for possible human error, because once you have systems set up, you can validate these systems like the LIMS system and how it integrates with your instrument, so you can verify that everything works smoothly. And then once that verification process is done, then you should be able to trust that whatever is falling, data that flows into your LIMS from your instrument directly doesn't have to be peer checked on a constant basis. So there are different components and different systems that you should, as a laboratory manager or director, to look at, and that way you can get something that you're comfortable with and can meet the needs of your particular lab. So again, the word traceability comes into play, something that I do want to just touch base on for a few minutes. And traceability is really the whole cradle to grave concept. You get a sample in your door, and it is your responsibility. You have to be able to show everything about that sample. And that is every hand that touched it, every milligram that was used. You need to be able to show where it went, and that particular ingredient, or not ingredient, that particular part of the sample was destroyed properly or used up. And then also you want to be able to track what consumables that you utilize, primarily because if something would happen and there's a recall on a consumable or something of that nature, and that consumable was used in your lab, you will be able to trace back what samples that particular consumable was associated with. And then if there is an issue with that, that may cause some issues in your data, you would be able to flag that information and then be able to talk with your client and be able to decide what needs to be done. But that whole concept of traceability, it's really for your protection and the protection of your lab and everybody in your lab, so that if questions or something becomes missing or something is lost sample-wise, you would be able to backtrack and trace to see where that sample was and what happened to it. So traceability is really important, especially in a highly regulated industry such as cannabis, and then also other pharmaceutical style analytics. So the next component that you really want to look at once you kind of go from method development, getting your lab up and running, samples start coming in, and you're producing data. And that's where you get to your data analysis and your data management. Analytical labs produce a ton of data. And being able to track that data, analyze it, and then also keep it in an organized manner is really important for an analytical laboratory. So I think the biggest thing to look at is to utilize the programs that you have. So like the LIMS program, for instance, your data is flowing into that and you use that to produce reports and that. And a lot of the LIMS programs have a data management part or component of them. So that allows you to store data and be able to retrieve it on a per client basis. So you can keep it all together with each individual client. So it's easy to find and easy to work with. And then also it can be per different types of tests or instrumentation. So there's a lot of different ways that you can organize, and you just have to organize it the best way for you and for what your lab is trying to do. But a big thing on your data analysis is really trying to make sure that your experimental controls and that your data verification steps are built in to your data analysis. And your experimental controls are checking that your instrument is running the way it's supposed to, and it falls within that validation package that you established, so that the instrument's running properly and that you have a complete extraction. So the actual extraction techniques and those kinds of things kind of fall within the preview of this particular sample, and that you can trust the data that you are producing. Also within your data analysis and your data management is kind of your check and balance system. So an individual that produces data, there needs to be a secondary individual, like a peer review process, and then usually a tertiary review. And that would be by a senior analyst or the laboratory director. And that's your final approval process before a report is issued to a client. And those requirements are sometimes set up either by the client themselves or by the regulatory body that you are trying to produce data for. So I know some states require that the laboratory director is their final check. Some require just a senior level analyst. So you have to understand what the needs for your particular program are, and then also how long data has to be maintained and what the condition of that data has to be in, if it's digital is appropriate, or if there needs to be any type of hard copy of that stuff produced. So once you get all your data and everything is in a form that you're ready to present it to your client, this is where you get to the reporting portion. And the heart of your lab is the report itself. That is what you are producing. You are not producing numbers. You're not producing a widget. You are producing a report. And your report is essential that you can stand behind what numbers you are producing, that it becomes defensible because everything that you have is validated, and you have a quality assurance plan or a quality management system. So you have your checks and balances built in, not just to eliminate human error, but also that your instruments and your calibrations are always within check, and that you would be able to stand behind your data. And this is really the data integrity process. And it's vital for our industry, because without it, everything comes into question, and then everything can start falling apart if people can start poking holes within our methods and how we do it. So defensibility and data integrity is paramount for our industry, for not just the cannabis industry, but just the analytical chemistry as a whole. So those are really your big components for setting up your lab and the individual components within your laboratory setup. Once you kind of get through that portion, there's a few other kind of what I like to call buzzwords or pitfalls that you hear and that are expected during this your client facing. And some of those big things are your turnaround time, which really deals with client satisfaction and how fast you can get things out. There's a lot of work that has to go into your instrumentation and the records. ISO accreditation, that's something that I'm sure comes up on every conversation. We'll touch base on that. And then just your overall general laboratory safety. So turnaround time. So turnaround time, everybody can do pretty much anything. And as far as your analytics are concerned and just producing data and those kinds of things, but it's always trying to find that balance between doing quality work, how quickly you can get it to somebody, and the cost. Those are kind of the three big pillars. And they always say I can do something of high quality. It may take a while and it can be cost effective, but if you want high quality and you want it fast, it becomes very expensive. So you try to put a balance in between these three components, and all of that really goes into making your clients happy, the client satisfaction portion. And the biggest upfront problem is just really managing those expectations and giving yourself the time that you need to produce quality data, but also make sure that you are staying on top of things. Otherwise, you can get things can fall behind and components can be missed. So it's really important to be upfront and work with your clients if something starts to become in question, and really just trust the process. I mean, you are developing a high quality lab that has a good workflow process. And the idea is that you're taking that process and you're using that to get information to your clients quickly. And some of the things that you can do to help improve that is just really leverage your technologies. LIMS programs and document management systems. There are a lot of different types of softwares out there that are hugely important, and they have a lot of power to help if you utilize them properly and really understand some of the different components. And we talked a little bit about a LIMS system, and I'll talk a little bit more about, let's say, a document management system. Sometimes it can be one and the same, but a lot of times they're not. They may be two separate systems. And then also the other big thing is utilize your instrumentation software. I've looked at a lot of different labs and have talked to a lot of individuals, and they are not utilizing their instrument to their fullest potential. They're really trying to do a lot of manual work and a lot of different things in stepping outside of what the instrument can be doing for them. And they spend hours and hours doing peer review or looking line by line, when an instrument and the computer program can do it in just a matter of seconds or minutes. So it's really important to look at the technology and to look at the softwares that you have and the availability of them, and look at their capabilities so that you are utilizing them to your advantage. And then sometimes also it's important to periodically look at your SOPs to make sure everything's streamlined, because I know as time goes on, you may develop a process or something new that and they just keep building. And if you really step back and you look at your processes and your SOPs, your standard operating procedures, you can really question, like, well, is that necessary? Are we doing it the most efficient way? And sometimes having an outside audit, an efficiency audit, is a good way to do that. If you can, there's some outside firms or a sister lab that you may know, bring somebody else in from the outside and let them see, hey, what are you doing? What are your processes? And let them start asking questions and really try to push you to be more efficient. And sometimes that efficiency can reduce your turnaround time. And sometimes that efficiency can really be able to increase your workload. So there's a lot of different things that can be a big advantage of being able to do that periodic check to make sure that you are pushing or doing the proper processes within your lab. So also to make sure that you're maintaining a strong lab is your instrumentation records. That's kind of a big thing, especially in your accreditations. And the big thing is you walk into every lab, it's like, oh yeah, no, we do X, Y, and Z. We make sure that every Monday we're checking this part of the instrument, or we're running this cleaning process. If it is not recorded, it didn't happen, at least according to any type of regulatory body or agency. And it should be the same way for you as a laboratory director or laboratory manager. If you can't look in a notebook or within the LIMS system that does any type of recording for your instrumentation, if it's not there, it didn't happen. Even if your chemists swear up and down that, yes, I do this religiously every other day, they need to be recording it, because it's important that we do our daily and weekly maintenances, and then also our larger preventative maintenance schedules to keep the instruments running the way they're supposed to be running. And then also that can reduce your cost of instrument repairs in long term. Because your instrument, that's the lifeline of an analytical lab. When they're down, when they're broke, when things are not working the way they're supposed to be doing, you're not able to produce data, you're not able to produce reports, and then thus your clients are not being serviced. So it's important to be able to look at your maintenance logs and then look at that they're being serviced in a proper manner. And also another important process to look at, not just your maintenance logs, but also be looking at your repair costs and be able to maintain records of that, so that you can start looking at, this particular instrument or these particular processes starting to cost quite a bit of money in repairs. That way, is it time to look at upgrading an instrument or replacing an instrument, and you can actually have documentation to help make those determinations. Your LIMS system and some document management systems actually have modules for instrument information, which you should be able to utilize and to be able to help maintain those records. And then also, if you are asked from clients or ISO or any type of accrediting body, you'll be able to produce those records without any problems. You're not actually trying to find receipts or those kinds of things, because you can actually have them all stored in one location, which is really helpful. So the next topic on these buzzwords and pitfalls that I'd like to just briefly touch on is ISO accreditation. Everybody is looking for lab accreditations. There's several different bodies, but ISO is one of the larger ones that especially most of your regulatory labs um, are required to have. And ISO is really just looking at your procedures and your processes, and that you are maintaining your instruments, and that you have your validation packages are proper, and everything's within is in order. And it's just document, document, document. They're looking at your quality. They're looking at how you work with your customers. They're looking at complaints. They look at, are you looking towards the future as far as making sure that you can have any improvements of your process, or you look at risks. How do you handle samples? There's a lot of different things that go within looking at, or from an accreditation standpoint. And this is a process that takes quite a bit of time to do, but in the end, it is extremely important to make sure that you can have your methods accredited, and that you are able to produce a credible and reliable information for your clients. And it's important to be able to maintain a strong accreditation. In this process, there's individuals that are out there to be able to help. And it's just a matter of walking through the step-by-step procedures to maintain your accreditations, and then have your biannual audits and those kinds of things to help maintain this accreditations. And then the last thing I want to look at is just your laboratory safety and your personnel training records. Your personnel training records are part of your audit trail, and also your ISO accreditation. So it's important to be able to know that you have been training your employees properly, not only for yourself, but also for their safety and for their proficiency at what they claim or say that they're able to do, as far as the types of experimentation that they are able to do in the lab, what kind of extraction techniques, and that you're just maintaining a safe environment. So training records are really important. And then also being able to maintain a list of any type of lab injuries, or what we would call near misses, if something almost happened. That way you can be looking for trends, and to really understand, is there ways that you can become more efficient, or things that you can do as far as to help reduce any type of potential injuries, or any potential accidents. Because they're, again, not just very similar to with instruments break, or something becomes offline. If an individual, one of your chemists or your lab technician, is injured or becomes ill because of something within the lab, you're not only hurting that individual, or that individual has some problems, but as a lab as a whole, you're not as efficient, because you're missing a fully trained person within the lab, some of your personnel. So other parts of laboratory safety to look at is what kind of chemicals and what do you have within the lab, what chemicals are present, and then also knowing where they're located. This is important if there would be an accident or a fire or something of that nature, that you would know what is there and where it's at, so that you can be able to address any concerns in that area. Then also knowing your chemicals is because you have to have access to your data safety sheets. And those are things that give all the pertinent information about the chemicals within the lab. And that's required for you to have that information for your chemists or your technicians or anybody that comes within the lab. They should be able to find that information rapidly and be able to review it, and should have reviewed it before they start handling any type of chemicals. There are a couple of programs out there that help you manage these safety data sheets, or it can be something that's maintained manually. But you have to also make sure, if you are maintaining them manually, that you are keeping them current, so that if you have acetone or something that's in the laboratory or all the time, that you are maintaining the most update version of those SDSs, those safety data sheets, because they do change periodically, and some change between different vendors. So if you would have vendor A and then you decide to switch to vendor B because they don't have it available or cost, sometimes those data safety sheets can vary And it's really important to be able to make sure and maintain the most update, and that they are, as I said, accessible to your employees. So I really appreciate your time today, and then I hope that some of the information that you gather from this, I know it was a high-level overview just to kind of give you an idea of some of the components that go into setting up an analytical lab, particularly in the cannabis or CBD arena. And it's been my pleasure. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me, and I would be able to try to get you connected or be able to answer whatever I can. I appreciate it. Thank you.